Good.
Charles, do you remember where you were April 19th, 1995?
Yep, exactly. I was at home getting ready to leave. No, wait, I'm mixing two stories, similar stories up. I was in my insurance office. I'm in the insurance business. And I'm sitting in my office at, I got there 8 or 8:30 and probably. And so another agent and our secretary is sitting there with us. Have I still got you?
Yeah.
I see your screen froze up on me here.
Yeah, I think it's
I'm going to
just
talk.
slow
Okay, there we
internet
go.
speed.
And so we're sitting there having a cup of coffee. I'm going to go to the Capitol here in a little bit. So uh, it's a two-story, small to maybe medium-sized office building. Our office is right in the middle of it. The landlord had told us, are you still with me?
Yes.
The landlord told us that heat and air folks would be putting new units on sometime that week. And so we're sitting there talking, having coffee, and we hear this boom, boom, a double boom. And we stop and look at each other and go, well, I guess they're probably putting those new units on top of the building today. Continue talking. Just a few minutes go by, and my secretary at the Capitol called and said, hey, do you know what's going on? I said, no. She goes, there's some explosion downtown and blah, blah, blah. Nobody knows what it is. Some people think this or that. So this is just 5 or 10 minutes into the whole thing. And I said, well, I'm leaving right now. So I took off, headed down there. Yeah. And there's more to the story. I've told that story a million times.
Yeah, I'm sitting here looking at the building
Are you?
right now. What we're talking about is the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. And I was 10 years old when this happened. I do remember it. I don't remember where I was, but I do remember it. And as I'm looking at the building, like a third of it is missing. Like it's unbelievable. The pictures that I remember of that day, the people out in front of the building, the blood, the tears, and just the horror that came along with that day in particular. This destructive nature of ANFO. A lot of people don't know what ANFO is. A lot of people don't know the what happened before the Oklahoma City bombing and how Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols tie into the whole thing. And that's basically what I wanted to get into today is a deep dive on the Oklahoma City bombing and it's one of the largest in investigations in this nation's history. Up to that point, I think it was the largest. Um, but one of the largest
Mm-hmm.
investigations in this nation's history, and you were part of that investigation, and that's why I want to talk to you today. And I mean, you've been on the show. Thank you for being on again. And let's just dive into it. Where the beginning of where you came into the investigation was the day of the Oklahoma City bombing, or was it later?
Well, I mean, it was everybody was just first traumatized by the event. Everybody's just traumatized. So, when did I quote get into it? Well, I mean, I immediately had questions about it. Like again, just about everybody. People were saying, "What about the two?" There were two guys. There's a lot of things you don't know, but there's a two guy. Okay, so picture this: a camera set up, looking at the face of that building. So there happened to be a NBC affiliate camera guy down there for some reason. And so the bomb goes off. He immediately set this camera up and it just ran live. It just ran raw. And so for a period of time. And so two guys come walking by. Those guys have been the subject of, the whole case, were they part of it? Who were they? Blah, blah, blah. And then after that, you had the news media and then law enforcement starting to report on it. One of the very first reports from law enforcement was a was it a blue truck? Anyway, it was a pickup truck that left the scene. I'm pretty sure it was blue, and maybe it was brown. Gosh, I'm forgetting now. But they left the scene. Middle Eastern individuals is who they were looking for. They put an APB out for that. They had a woman that was at least one witness. This is a part of the story I usually don't talk about, but it's that real early time. Actually, here's some other things. There were some joggers that were running in front of the building that day. I saw one. I see this one guy from time to time. He didn't want to have anything to do with it, and none of the rest of them did either. But one of them was our county court clerk, a female. So they saw some things before the explosion, and this is part of the story. The night before and the early morning hours before the bombing happened, there were people that were around that were suspicious that others noticed, just to put it that way. And then in addition to that, you had the bomb squad that showed up before the bombing in front of the Murrah building and the federal courthouse looking for something. And it was not a drill or anything like that. That's highly well documented. So then you have the explosion happen, and then all the investigation starts. Well, there's a lot of people that that knew, like General Ben Parton, who is the world's expert on these kinds of matters, and I can get into that more as we go along. But people like him and others that spoke out that most people didn't hear about, but they came out with their own opinion. And General Parton, for example, came out with his own report, and we put that report inside our report. You know, this big. I don't remember if you and I talked about it, but here's a copy of the report we did. It's the size of a phone book. You know, you can use it as a weapon for defending yourself. But so we put his report in there, and as time went on, and I talked to lots of experts, and we included them in this book, this report. They all of them referred to Parton as the expert's expert. And the reason is because he conducted and oversaw all the tests that the military did at Eglin Air Force Base and elsewhere to find out everything you could ever learn about what kind of bombs work against what kind of targets, to really put it simply, you know. So they did ANFO, they did everything in the world. I'm going to stay on this track for a second because it goes to a part of this story that's real important, which is called the science, the bombs, and the building. Another thing about ANFO bombs and other examples of explosions or attacks like this that we could look at to compare and maybe learn is quite a few examples. There's the Dubai bombing that was some might remember that or heard the name. It was a really big tanker truck filled with ammonium nitrate and I guess diesel fuel, whatever it was, pulled up to a really big building, not that different than the Murrah building in Saudi Arabia, and set it off. And it didn't do as much damage as this did. And one of the reasons is because, another factor in all of this is what the experts told me. They said the quality of the grade of concrete and the construction in general in these other countries, especially third world countries, is a lot different. And the guy said this to me. He said, you could take a pencil if you're in that building and just grind it into the wall of that building. That's the type of concrete or whatever that they used. In other words, it was even easier to take down, but they couldn't take that one down. It just blew the face off of it. There's another one in Bogota, Colombia, where somebody tried to bomb a U.S. embassy, and they pulled another ammonia nitrate bomb out in front of it. Same thing, just blew the face off of it. It doesn't have the power to knock down columns, header beams, break them, anything like that. It doesn't have that kind of power. You have to have C4 or other explosives actually attached to the column or drilled into the column. Like when they do a demolition, that's what they do. You know, they'll drill into the various columns, and then they boom, 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 falls down like Lincoln logs, you know. So Parton's an expert on that, and we had a bunch of other guys and I had a press conference on June 30th of 95 when I kind of officially came out. So the bombing happened, and I'm looking at this case, talking to some people. That group grows bigger. There was family members, victims, and people that lost loved ones and employees of the government that were related to the bombing. And then when I came out, and some others, it wasn't just because of me, it was because some of the people in that group didn't like the answers they were being given. They didn't like what they were being told, and they were free thinkers, saw that things didn't add up, and they were saying publicly, as the press would interview them, where was the ATF? They weren't in the building, and other questions like that. So then I come out and I had a press conference at the state capitol. General Parton flew in for that. The world's expert, Galen Windsor, one of the inventors of the atomic bomb and part of the Manhattan Project. Both of those guys have passed away. Ted Gunderson, a top FBI, not just agent, but he ran the LA agency and he ran the Houston agency as a lifelong, not just agent, but he was in leadership. He had also refuted the ammonium nitrate bomb out front doing the damage. He was there. And then we were also supposed to have Sam Cohen there, who was the inventor of the neutron bomb. So you think about this cast of people, but he couldn't get there because the Unabomber, if you've heard of him, way back in the day, another terrorist type situation, he had made some threat, shut down the LA airport, so Sam Cohen couldn't fly out. But the NBC affiliate here in Oklahoma City got their sister NBC affiliate LA to interview him. So they ran this press conference even through the weekend, kept running clips of it and this guy. So we had this really amazing publicity, and it caused a lot more people to come out and want to tell us what they knew and talk to us. So I'll take a breath there and let you pick up from where you want to go.
So you had mentioned a couple Middle Eastern gentlemen walking by or running by the building at the very beginning, and that's kind of important to highlight there, because in the chaos of April 19th, the day of, in that chaos and in the couple days immediately after, they didn't know who they were looking for. It was information just based on it was an investigation based on the information that they had. They didn't have very much information at that time. And, just a couple years prior to 1995, we had, the bombing at the World Trade Center in 1993. So there was a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos at the very beginning of the investigation. But digging into the first few days of the investigation where you were a part of, was there any confusion on who was responsible? Obviously there's aliases attached to, the pickup truck or the rental truck. There's aliases there. Obviously didn't know, but was there any indication at first that this was domestic terrorism, or was there other indicators pointing the other direction at first?
Well, there was actually a lot of indicators. Well, another thing I should mention, that NBC affiliate in Oklahoma City actually did a real investigation on the bombing. And then they got shut down by being bought out by the New York Times. Think about that.
I
So
didn't know that
they
either.
had a report. Yeah, they had a reporter named Jana Davis who ended up writing a book about what she had done. And you had this news director, her name was Melissa Cleansing. And when I went and talked to her, myself and one of the survivors of the bombing that was part of our Oklahoma bombing investigation committee, we went to talk to her. And and one of the things she said, liberal Democrat, and blah, 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 blah. She would just saying it in good nature, just trying to make the point that you guys are Republicans. I'm a Democrat, left wing Mondale Democrat, and I believe in openness and transparency and all that kind of stuff. So she's the news director allowing all this to happen. And so they had two other seasoned reporters. One was very seasoned that was that were digging into this. And so, yeah, my mind just blows up with all kinds of stories, Ricky, because there is so much to this. That one other reporter was a male named Brad Edwards. He's passed away now. He and I were getting phone calls from, and I know this in my heart and mind and my gut, that it was the bad guys trying to throw us off on on a bad trail, I was getting just flooded with information from people. It's all legitimate people. Some stories were kind of crazy. I could write a book just on the crazy stories, but it was,
Yeah, I'm
and
looking
so
at
I had
some of
this
these
guy.
conspiracy theories right here, and some of them are absolutely insane. You're right.
If we have time, I'll tell you one that really draws the point of how some of them are pretty crazy, or how the bad guys, the government, will try to take you, give you some bait to take you down a path. So I started getting this phone call from a guy, and if I ever ran into him again, I've said this, I would recognize him in a second because he had a real gruff, kind of heavy voice, and he would call me from a payphone, and he said, "This is what the story was." Every time, I think I talked to him 3 times. He said, "Representative Key, um, we've got video of McVeigh meeting ATF agents at the McDonald's downtown the night." That's the story he's telling. We want to get this video to somebody. Well, of course I'd like that. Well, he's calling this other guy at the NBC affiliate and telling him the same thing. I found out a little bit later. So I'm telling other people about this, and when he calls me back the second time, he's playing the game. And now that after the fact, I understand he's playing the game that, well, we don't want to just give this to anybody. We want somebody that's really going to do something with it, and show it, and do something. He was really selling it. And I said, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm definitely, look what I'm doing. I'm going to do this. I was all over the news, and that went on for about 3 or 4 years like that as the trial went on. Well, we never met up with him, but I found out later, like a couple of weeks later, talking to this Brad Edwards, that was a NBC reporter. He was getting the same call from the same guy, and they were trying to bait us, either him go out in the news or me be interviewed and say, yeah, there's a video out there. I'm talking to somebody, and we know there's a video out there that blah 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 da 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 da, and then I never can show it, and it makes me look, like I'm a conspiracy theorist chasing things down the trail. So that never came around, but it was an interesting event in and of itself. Um, that was a legitimate rumored story, because other there's another press, without getting into the weeds too much. Remember the press that was also chasing that same story, that McVeigh was part of the sting operation that went wrong. Because the bottom line, this whole answer to this, people want to know, well, what's the bottom line? Bottom line is, after Ruby Ridge and Waco, some higher ups in the DOJ and ATF, literally, because I'll tell you the rest of the story, decided to create a fake sting operation to try to make them look good. And so their intent was to catch these bad guys right there in Oklahoma City, apparently, right there, and go, look, we caught these guys getting ready to blow up a building and blah, blah, blah. Look, we saved the day. Well, so there were suspicious activities, like I said, the night before. So there's some legitimacy to this, in addition to some others. Now, maybe it was all the same people giving it to lots of media, just trying to spread disinformation. But I of course remember all this distinctly, and I remember the points at which the FBI, the Department of Justice, the government, as we refer to them, uh, stopped looking for John Doe number 2 unofficially. But as far as the public pronouncement, they said, well, we found out what happened. There's really not a John Doe number 2. McVeigh rented the truck by himself, and that was it, period. The reason they were able to say that is because many that have read about this case will remember that the Ryder truck was rented at the Eldon's Body Shop and Ryder Truck Rental Facility in Grand Junction, Kansas.
Junction City,
And
Kansas. Yeah.
so when McVeigh went in to rent it, yeah, sorry, Junction City. And so when McVeigh comes in, Eldon Elliott is there, his manager, Connie Beamer, and there's also a third guy that's sitting off in the corner. He's a mechanic. He's taking a break, eating his lunch. And so this is a small little office, is actually 10 by 10, about 10 by 10. The McVeigh walks in with the other John Doe, and Eldon Elliott and Connie Beamer do all the transaction. This other guy sitting over here doesn't do anything. He's just sitting there taking a break, but he also sees this happen. So Connie and Eldon are doing the transaction. Well, they clearly see there's a John Doe there. So as the FBI is going running down all these trails, and this becomes a focal point at one point. And we went up there. We had investigators ourselves, and I went up there myself many times. The FBI was trying to get Eldon Elliott after they'd interviewed him many times. Kept asking the same questions. They even told us we kind of feel like they're trying to get us to change our story or something because they just keep saying, "Well, could it be this or could it be that? Are you sure about that?" And so then they pitched to them, "Will you guys go under hypnosis?" Well, Eldon and Connie said, "No, we're not going under hypnosis. We don't need to, and we don't want to." But they talked the other guy into doing it. And after they did that hypnosis on Tom Kessinger was his name, the next day they came out and you could look this up in the history of the press. They came out and said, "We found out what happened. Um, this guy, I mean, McVeigh came in by himself, but they mixed it up with two other guys that came in the day before. So that was their story that they started pitching. That was their official story. McVeigh rented it by himself, and Connie and Eldon made a mistake and just mixed it up. Big crock of BS. Another witness story from that area at the Dreamland Hotel where McVeigh stayed. And we interviewed that place out the wazoo ourselves. McVeigh and the John Doe that was in the room with him ordered some Chinese food for delivery. The the Chinese delivery food guy's name is Jeff King. He shows up, knocks on the door. The guy opens the door, pretty wide to do the transaction. And McVeigh, according to Jeff King, is sitting right there on the couch while the John Doe does the transaction. The John Doe in that case was not a dark complected person. It was a Anglo of some type. And so clearly another witness to McVeigh and a John Doe there. And then to connect onto that story yet again, Jeannie Boylan, who is the famous portrait sketch artist that does all kinds of stuff for the FBI over the years. I don't know if she's still alive. She's written books and stuff. They had her come in to do the sketch of the John Doe of that transaction. And while she's talking to the Jeff King, the guy, he goes, "Well, yeah, McVeigh," he opened the door. McVeigh's just sitting right there. I can see him just several feet away from me and blah, blah, blah. And she goes, "Really?" She didn't get that from the FBI when they contacted her and asked her to do this sketch. So she thought immediately, she was thinking, maybe they don't know about this. So she went and stopped and went and told them, "Did you know this?" And they go, yeah. Just forget about that. Just do the sketch, She said it was like they dismissed her, like they didn't care. They didn't want that to be brought out. That was her statement. So anyway, there's a jillion stories that we could talk about for hours of stories like this that are real telling.
Yeah, strategic is
So
sometimes
I'm taking my breath.
yeah, sometimes in police investigations they use a strategic ambiguity, especially with large investigations like this. Sometimes investigators and police will throw out false leads. Sometimes they will keep information tightly that way that it doesn't kind of it doesn't mess up the investigation by letting certain aspects of the case go public or putting out false narratives to help the investigation in the event, well, if somebody comes to us with this kind of information, we do know that they were part of the case because this is all the information that is public. So those things do happen. I wonder if that's kind of what their thinking was on that. Did we ever find out who that John Doe was?
No, no, but of all the government investigative documents that are FBI or ATF, that many are in this report that I referenced. There's mentioned numerous confidential sources by their code number. And
we're coming up on 30 years here, and I didn't realize that until this morning. This is it's pretty wild because like you just said something that's very interesting. There's the conspiracy about Timothy McVeigh possibly meeting with ATF. And I didn't really put two and two together here. Was the ATF a target of this bombing?
yes, they were the target because of Ruby Ridge and Waco. They were the bad guys in both of those cases. Terrible, terrible what they did.
I
And I'll tell you,
I absolutely agree with that. I didn't put two and two together until just now when you had said that Timothy McVeigh may have met with ATF and there was the video being shopped to media, I didn't put two and two together that maybe this was possibly an ATF target. I didn't, for whatever reason, I didn't think about that. But yeah, absolutely. I didn't know the ATF wasn't in the building either.
Yeah, and I'll tell you how I know that I know in my mind it was a sting operation that went wrong. I sorry that I did another interview this morning on the bombing, so I can't remember if I said this on this interview or the other one. But the deal was is that you had, I'm sorry, bring me back to where we were, Ricky. I forget where we were.
So we were talking about at first we were talking about Timothy McVeigh going and renting the truck with John Doe, and the sketch artist. And then we were talking about, I was just talking, thinking out loud, more or less. I didn't realize that the ATF was the target of the Oklahoma City bombing.
Yeah, so the story I want to tell you there is that, I'm getting a lot of people that are coming to me at the Capitol. They're calling me, they're emailing me, they're meeting with them here and there. A lot of them came to the Capitol, and I meet a guy that tells me that I get a lady that has a piece of paper. Imagine a piece of paper is typed out and it's saying things on there. It might be about the bombing and primarily and about other things. And then she would sign it Dove, Dove, and slide it under the door. So I got that about two times. And I said to my secretary at the time, I said, have you ever seen this lady? And she said, no, not really. But I did see her once coming back from lunch. As I was walking down the hall to our office, I saw somebody slip something under the door and walk off. I said, well, and she knew the drill, Leslie did. And she, tell them I can't use what she's showing me and giving me unless I can talk to her face to face. And I'll do it confidentially. I won't out them or anything like that. So it turned, and I thought, well, that'll never come about because what she was saying in there was pretty strong stuff. And it sounded like somebody that knew what they were talking about. So it turned out, wasn't very long after that, she came back through and Leslie talked to her. She goes, yeah, I'll meet with you. So she met with me. Her profile, she was about 45, a registered nurse. Her brother worked for one of our congressmen who later became a U.S. senator, a very popular person here in our state, has passed away now. And her brother worked in that ran this one office of his. And then when they would have family get-togethers like Thanksgiving, I think this was right after Thanksgiving or some holiday like that, they would get together. Family did stuff like that all the time, and he would tell stories and tell things that he knew and was working on. Well, I asked her, she talk to him and see if he would meet with me confidentially? And I thought, well, that's never going to happen. I mean, he's working for a congressman; he's just not going to take the risk. He actually agreed to do it. I drove all the way out of town for like 2 hours to where this was. I had started trying to record interviews like that I did. So I had this micro cassette recorder in my suit pocket, and I was doing it kind of secretively. And so I'll never forget. I took another guy with me that was a Marine, retired of his own, and Key goes, "Come on in." And then he told the other guy, he said, "No, just Representative Key, you stay here. I'm just going to talk to him." So I went in and we sat down, and almost immediately goes, "Representative Key, are you recording this?" And I said, I just kind of, I probably had a sheepish look on my face, and I said, "Yeah." So I just pulled it out of my pocket and set it up there and turned it off, and then we talked, and it was cool. Everything was cool. It just that he was savvy. He was protecting himself. He proceeded to tell me a lot of things, a story that had a lot of stuff in it, but the really good part is he said, I was having a conversation during all of this stuff he was telling me about related. He goes, I was talking to an assistant DOJ person and an assistant ATF. And they said, well, look, as he's Q&Aing them and they're talking, they say, look, the genesis of the Oklahoma City bombing was a fake sting operation that was put together after Waco to make the ATF look good. And I said, wait a minute, blah, 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 blah. I had questions. I said, well, how did they say it? He goes, that's exactly how they said it. The genesis of the bombing was a fake sting operation that they put together to try to make them look good and make the ATF look looked good because they were almost axed from the federal tree after Waco. It was that bad, and Ruby Ridge. So also, Ricky, we've got documents now, and I suspect we'll do a future part two on this Oklahoma City bombing stuff, which I'm happy to do, and I will send the copy of this one document I'm talking about to you.
I tell you what,
It's
Charles,
a
we can go ahead and make plans now. If you want to come up here and do it in studio, we can figure out logistics and I can pay for your way up here and we can figure it out.
well, I may do that. That's real. That'd be a real cool thing to do. But this document shows. So you imagine the documents like you get them, and then there's stuff redacted, and then there's some stuff on there that says this confidential report that we received, blah blah blah, shows that the bombing was, there was a fake sting operation, and da 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 da. Da. I mean, it just says it out real plain. And it's not like that's the big smoking gun. We've got multiple smoking guns. There's actually a lot of smoking guns here, but that's yet another one, and it's easy to communicate it. And it's something like on a program like this, you could have it, and you could probably pull it up, when we do a future program, and
Yeah,
people
so
could just look at it, or they could
we've
get
got
the
all
bombing
the
report.
we've got all the things like the big podcasts have. Like we've got all that here in studio. Like the only thing that we don't have that the big podcasts have is like the cameras, because our the camera setup that we have now, it's kind of like we're dealing with the space that we have, and we're getting ready to change up this whole studio. It's going to look similar, but it's going to be different ultimately. But we're making the studio bigger and more friendly for live interviews, and that's ultimately what I'd like to do. When I thought about doing this interview right here, I was like, man, it would be really great to do this in studio, because Charles, like you have a wealth of knowledge just on this case alone, and I I'm actually in the middle of reading your book right now. I just started chapter 4, so I'm almost halfway through it, and it, it's incredible. You were talking about the micro cassette recorder in your pocket. As I was reading your
Mm.
book, I was thinking about in states like Missouri, we have no. This is a one party consent state. So only one person has to have knowledge of the recording that's going on. The one person in the conversation. That could be me, that could be you. But as long as one
Oklahoma,
person knows.
Oklahoma's the same way.
Yeah, and so that's as I was reading your book, Charles, I was wondering, I was like, in those particular states, I wonder if anybody's ever recorded conversations like what you're talking about in the book going on with legislators, uh, and politicians, career politicians. I'm wondering if anybody's ever done that and just said, look, I'm tired of the crap. My hands are tied. I'm ultimately going to turn these tapes over to the public so they can hear them. I wonder if anybody's done that or tried to do that
You mean specifically on the bombing, or just in general?
in general, and the bombing too, because like I knew there was conspiracy theories on this. I knew, but I'd never talked to anybody involved in the investigation, and I'd never even really thought about this being a false flag. Never in my wildest dreams did I think about it being a false flag. But now I'm thinking in my head, like I just put this together this morning, right before I'm talking to you. Like, was the ATF a target? And now, like the information that you've shared, it's like, holy crap, man, we might have, like a legitimate false flag attack here.
Well, it very well could be, and actually, people that are inclined to think that way right off the bat, which I am very sympathetic to, because the more you learn, the more you realize that the government's not good. But yeah, so you can see. Well, matter of fact, about a recording, my mind's so thick with this. I mean, there's so much here. There was a recording that there was a lady, and we can't find her now. We were assuming she's passed away. Her name was Ramona McDonald. Ramona, if you're out there somewhere, contact me, please. But there was a lot of people that got involved in doing, how do I characterize that? Doing various kinds of work to try to bless people and to address the tragedy part of it. And she was part of that. And there was a bunch of people got together and they put together a book called, I think it was called Angels Over Oklahoma. And it was primarily a pictorial. Just it wasn't trying to do what we're talking about. It was just, trying to show the human side of it. And that's how I met her. Well, she knew a lot of people because of that. Well, she started learning a lot of things like so many people did, and they would just automatically talk every time they would talk to almost, frequently. And they would talk about it in terms of something's not right, or there's a cover up. So she was also like that. Well, there's a tape. She taped a recording of her with a local law enforcement guy. And we're not sure who it is, to tell you the truth. We know it's one of two people, but I'm going to say it's going to be the lesser, more sensational one. One of them is a local police officer and one of them is a local U.S. congressman. And so they just sound a lot alike, but let's just say it was probably the police officer. He's a police officer in a local small town in the metro area, but he was also part of, as you know, I'm sure the feds will come in and they'll do task forces with county sheriffs and Oklahoma City police departments and various things like that. So he was part of some type of task force that had to do with terrorism and drug interdiction. I think, as I recall, it was titled. They're having this long conversation. It's in the book. And he comes right out and says, he goes, "Look, Ramona, you don't understand what you're doing. There's undercover agents involved in this. You're potentially putting their lives in danger by talking about this and saying that there's these problems and it doesn't add up. So these undercover agents are going to be exposed to blah, 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 blah. And that it was a sting operation that went wrong, and blah, blah, blah." So, I mean, there's yet another one where you've got somebody with authority like that and with knowledge telling what they know.
That's wild, man. That is absolutely wild. And
And there's
so,
more. It's kind of like a commercial. There's more.
eh,
There's a ton of it. There's a ton of it.
well, that book you just held up, I mean, it's that thick, and that's not even all of it. That's just why it's unbelievable. We were talking about AMPO
Let
just a
me do
minute ago.
this. If you
Yeah, go ahead. What's that?
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We've got that delay that kind of messes.
Yeah, go
I,
ahead.
I didn't mean to mess you up, and I forgot about that delay that we have in our feed.
Oh, no worry. Go ahead.
Um, there was what happened. We were getting. I'm going to go back to the early days again. So we're getting just flooded with information. I mean, it's just like a fire hose, basically. And some of it has to do with witnesses, some of it has to do with Middle Eastern, some of it has to do with prior knowledge. It might be about there's multiple trucks involved. There's this. So I started thinking we got to start categorizing this and start organizing it, which we did. And so we ended up writing this final report in that organization. So the way the organization is, it's the very first chapter in there is the preliminary hearing that occurred in El Reno, Oklahoma, at the federal prison there. Because some may remember that they McVeigh was incarcerated in another town north of Oklahoma City. They found out he was there. They transported him down to this federal prison to do the preliminary hearing and charge him. So that's the first chapter, and that's real interesting. And the reason it's the first chapter is because in that proceeding, that's when they bring their evidence forward to justify holding this person over and for trial and charging him with a crime. Well, what did they provide as their information? It was all eyewitnesses that saw McVeigh with someone else. It wasn't witnesses that just saw McVeigh. Everybody sees him with somebody else. So they had this problem in the beginning that was raw at the time. It was all naturally, organically moving along there. But as time went on, back to them eliminating the John Doe at the Eldon's Body Shop, they started trying to carve out those other John Does because if you go down that path, you'll find you'll find what we found, which was lots of confidential informants and others, agent provocateurs, whatever. You'll find lots of information that the FBI or ATF should have acted upon. you'll find out that the FBI and the ATF were knocking heads, weren't getting along at all. And so they weren't communicating because they had problems with each other. There's one story, and it comes from a ATF document, a field report where they're having to do a field report of something that they just did. Well, what they were doing in this case is they contacted Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation to fly over Elohim City, way out eastern part of Oklahoma, to just take some pictures and see what's going on out there, do our further investigation. Yeah, they can do that. So then the rest of the report is them flying and talking during the course of that flight and the whole ordeal. And while the pilot says to them at some point as they talk, the pilot says, well, you know that these are ATF people. The pilot says, you know that the FBI's got their own informants in there, don't you? And they said, no, we didn't know that. So it's another confirmation of that, but also that they didn't even know that what they were doing there, which could also be part of the problem. You know, who knows? Maybe it was why it blew up literally in their face. But
Yeah, something
lots of
similar,
stories like that we'll get into as we go.
something similar to 9/11. FBI had information, CIA had information, they just weren't talking to each other. Is something similar like that? Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, when you look at the World Trade Center bombing, that first one in '93, something I learned back then during the time was that they had this informant that was meeting with the bad guys that were going to make the bomb that eventually was made and blew up at the World Trade Center. And then, but they had their informant inside, and this guy was a U.S. military person who was of Arab descent. So he fit in with those criminals that were carrying this out. So and this comes out in the trial testimony of those people they convicted for doing that. It's in the trial transcript. This guy says he calls his FBI handler to say, they're making the bomb tonight. Do you still want me to put that, as I recall it, Ricky, this is how he said it. You still want me to put that substance in there to make it inert or some words to that effect? And the FBI agent handler says, no, negative, do not do that. In other words, we're changing the plans. Let them go ahead and make it. Well, they did go ahead and make it, and they blew it up and killed people and hurt a lot of people, you know.
One of the stories I've heard about, that 1993 uh, uh, World Trade Center attack was as they were leaving, as they were, I can't remember who they had, but anyway, they said, look, motherfucker, it's still standing as they're flying away from the building in New York City. And they said, look, motherfucker, it's still standing. And then that was a catalyst for Al Qaeda to hit it again in 2001. And that's people had said that. There's multiple interviews out there with an FBI agent. I can't remember his name, but he's a former FBI agent, and he tells that story. He's told that story 3 or 4 times. And it's just, I hear that and I'm like, man, I would probably say something similar. I'd be like, look, you can't hurt us. It's still here. It's still standing, but it's not now. And in hindsight, listening to things like that, it's like, man, if he had he not said that, maybe 2001 wouldn't have happened. But that goes just like Ruby Ridge and Waco. Timothy McVeigh chose April 19th for a reason. It was 2-year anniversary of the Waco fire.
Yeah, and there's some other things significant to April 19th. Um, I'm going to go back to where I was, so I know that next time hopefully we'll be in studio. Next time we do this, we'll really be prepared. So I was talking about categories in the report. It starts with a preliminary hearing, but the next chapter is the trial. To me, that's the most boring, and it's long because it's a big trial, but it's the trial. And I'll mention one thing and there's a lot of significant stuff in there, obviously, but one thing that's particularly interesting to bring up in this interview is at one point they had a FBI crime lab agent named Lewis Hupp. that was going to report. All he was there for to do was to talk about, yeah, we had all these fingerprints. There was this many and this, that, and the other, and data facts. So the prosecution's asking him those questions. They finish. The defense gets up, wants to do a cross examination. They say, well, Mr. Hupp, how many fingerprints, palm prints were there totally collected related to the bombing? And I'm going by memory now, Ricky. The numbers are mixing up, but it's something like 1,033 or 34. Maybe it's 1,034. So there was a total of 1,034. And then he asked him, he goes, well, how many of those did you run those through your FBI database of 35 million, I think is what it had at the time. So you got the biggest crime that's ever happened in our country, 1,034 fingerprints. Did you run them through your database? The answer was no, they did not. That just still blows my mind. When I say it, I can't, I'm incredulous about it. They did, he said, but they did have a list of 8 people, which were like Terry Nichols, Tim McVeigh, it was James Nichols, his brother, Terry Nichols, like 12 or 13-year-old son, and maybe his wife and some other people like that. But they didn't take the whole thing to see if what matched up with their database. That to me is criminal in and of itself.
I agree. As I'm hearing that, I can't believe it.
Yeah, it's amazing. During that time, also,
that's the easy work, Charles. That is the easy work.
that's the easy thing. Yeah, use computers and AI to help us solve this case.
And back then in 1995, we had the internet in 95. We had and of course the internet came from the government, so obviously they had it, you know. That's wild that they didn't run over 1,000 handprints and fingerprints. They didn't run any of them.
I think it was 1,034 is what it was. But then, so there was the trials, and then we broke it up into like the eyewitnesses. Who are the eyewitnesses that saw anything? So we go through that. There's damage to the building, which takes in everything related to the building, the bombs, the experts. We have, I think there's 8 experts in this report. Did I mention all of them to you, General
No.
Parton? Okay.
In general, you did mention the general.
Well, there's others in here too that are just there's the inventor of the neutron bomb, the inventor of the atomic bomb. There's a man named Robert Hansen, who, when you look at his resume, you think he's the expert of experts, seriously, because he teaches all over the world. He's probably passed away now. He teaches all over the world about blast wave overpressure. Woo!